How did Ivanovka, the fortress thought to be unbreakable, collapse almost overnight, sending shockwaves through military circles from Kyiv to Washington? Ivanovka was never meant to fall. For over half a year, Ukrainian engineers, soldiers, and NATO advisors poured their expertise and resources into transforming Ivanovka into the gold standard of Ukrainian resistance. Imagine a vast web of defenses, not just a ring of trenches, but an intricate latticework of layered obstacles, reinforced concrete bunkers, anti-tank ditches, and kilometers of barbed wire. Overhead, surveillance drones kept a tireless watch, while beneath the ground, command bunkers bristled with encrypted communications gear. NATO advisors boasted that Ivanovka embodied the best of Western doctrine, a fortress engineered, they believed, to withstand any siege in the 21st century. For Ukrainian commanders and their allies, Ivanovka was much more than a fortified town. It was a symbol of modern warfare's promise. In every briefing, on every map in military headquarters from Kyiv to Brussels and Washington, Ivanovka's name gleamed as a testament to the alliance of technology, discipline, and international support. The message was simple. With the right tools and the right doctrine, the line could be held, whatever the enemy's strength. Its very existence inspired hope, and a dangerous sense of certainty. But in less than 2 days, that certainty shattered. Ivanovka did not just fall, it imploded, its defenses unraveling with astonishing speed. Analysts, generals, and intelligence officers were left reeling, their playbooks rendered obsolete overnight. The shock was so intense that some compared it to the fall of Singapore in the Second World War, when a fortress deemed impregnable collapsed in a matter of days, shattering imperial confidence for a generation. Was it overwhelming firepower or a sudden armored thrust that doomed the city? Or did the real threat come from within? Subtle sabotage, information leaks, or a masterstroke of psychological warfare? As Ivanovka's walls crumbled, so too did the assumptions and doctrines that had shaped an entire Western security model. The stakes could not be higher. If we fail to understand what truly happened in Ivanovka, future armies might march toward disaster, haunted by invisible threats and blind to their own vulnerabilities. Billions in equipment and the lives of thousands hang in the balance. To uncover the truth behind Ivanovka's rapid fall, we must go back, months before the siege began, to the quiet, unnoticed events that set the stage for catastrophe. The roots of Ivanovka's collapse run deeper than any battlefield maneuver. To see the whole picture, we must start with how the city's defenses were conceived, and how small cracks began to form long before the enemy arrived. Why did Ivanovka matter so deeply? Not just as a military asset, but as a symbol. This was never simply a dot on the map. Ivanovka was the pulse of the front line, the logistical heart that kept dozens of Ukrainian positions alive. Its warehouses brimmed with supplies, its arteries of asphalt carried reinforcements and fuel. To lose Ivanovka was not only to surrender a city, but to risk the collapse of an entire defensive region. Ivanovka's fall threatened over 100 kilometers of defensive lines, exposing flanks and disrupting the supply and evacuation routes for wounded soldiers. This was not just a tactical loss, it was a logistical catastrophe. For months, Western analysts and Ukrainian strategists funneled countless resources and unshakable belief into Ivanovka's fortifications. The city's defenses were built to the highest NATO doctrines: layered bunkers, interconnected strongpoints, digital command nodes, and state-of-the-art surveillance. Ivanovka was not chosen by chance. It was meant to be a living showcase, a model of how Western military theory could reshape this war's brutal reality. Journalists toured its defenses, military attachés took notes, and think tanks across Europe published glowing assessments, predicting that Ivanovka could hold out for weeks, perhaps even months, against a determined siege. Everything was wagered on Ivanovka. Years of doctrine, planning, and investment converged at this single point. The city was more than a stronghold. It was a myth made concrete, a promise that Western technology and tactics could hold chaos at bay. For Ukraine and its allies, Ivanovka embodied stability and hope, a bulwark against disaster, That is why its fall in October was not a simple setback. In a matter of hours, years of faith and millions in materiel were swept away. The loss gouged more than a hole in defensive lines. It cracked the very idea that such lines could be trusted at all. Suddenly, the fortress everyone believed in stood revealed as a facade, and vulnerabilities stretched far beyond Ivanovka's battered walls. This was a domino effect. One stronghold fell, and the entire defensive network trembled. Yet the catastrophe did not begin when the first shells landed or tanks advanced. The unraveling had started much earlier, in the quiet months when Ivanovka's invincibility was taken for granted, when overconfidence became the most dangerous adversary of all. To understand why Ivanovka truly fell, we must go back to those silent months of supposed security. Beneath the surface, hidden flaws were already spreading. What forces, unseen and silent, set Ivanovka's fate in motion long before the first shell exploded? Months before the world learned the town's name, a shadow war unfolded beneath the surface. Russian intelligence operatives, methodical and unhurried, infiltrated Ivanovka with a precision that escaped all notice. Ukrainian counterintelligence, trained to Western standards, found no trace, no intercepted message, no compromised agent, while the network grew deeper, layer by careful layer. This was not the first time such infiltration had changed the fate of a battle. In the First World War, German agents mapped out French positions at Verdun, allowing for a devastating opening barrage. In Ivanovka, history seemed to rhyme once again. Each day, Russian eyes watched the routines of their adversaries. They noted the timing of every convoy, the exact routes supply trucks took, and the faces of those who commanded them. They mapped where fortifications rose and how the garrison rotated, or more often, how it failed to. Even subtle shifts in mood and morale, weariness, resignation, the flicker of hope or anger, were quietly recorded, just as British intelligence once mapped the daily lives of German U-boat crews during the Battle of the Atlantic. This relentless surveillance became a living map. Every ammunition crate stacked, each rotation skipped, every idle rumor among the troops. Russian analysts compiled it all into a database so precise that even minor logistical lapses glared like warning beacons. Ammunition depots, for instance, had been moved closer to civilian districts, a well-meaning attempt to shield them, but in truth, creating hazardous, densely packed targets. One misjudged shipment, one overlooked patrol change, could become the thread that unraveled the whole defense. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian defensive plan, praised as a model of NATO doctrine, hardened into routine. Its layers, trenches, fixed gun emplacements, predictable patrols, became not shields, but signposts. What once seemed unbreakable now revealed its rigidity with every passing week, as supply lines stretched thin and commanders clung to familiar patterns. In military history, this is a familiar trap. The Maginot Line in France, built in the interwar years, was hailed as an unbreachable wall, until German forces simply bypassed it through the Ardennes, exploiting its inflexibility. Ivanovka's defenders, like those manning the Maginot Line, grew so confident in their fortifications that they stopped imagining how they might be circumvented. The Russian planners saw opportunity in this predictability. Their operation was not just a military assault, but a choreography of anticipation. Weather forecasts, shift schedules, blackout drills, all were factored in. When the time came, their first strike would be more than physical. It would fracture communications, sow panic, and isolate units so suddenly that confusion would outpace even the artillery's reach. This echoes the earliest uses of electronic warfare, such as in the Arab-Israeli conflicts of the late 20th century, where jamming and deception turned even the strongest defensive positions into isolated pockets. The danger was not just at the front. Overconfidence in established models made Ukrainian commands slow to notice the ground shifting beneath them. In modern war, belief in fortifications, without the willingness to question or adapt, can crumble a defense in a single night. As history has shown, from the fall of Sevastopol in the Second World War to the sudden collapse of Mosul's defenses in 2014, psychological preparation and adaptability matter as much as concrete and steel. For months, the invisible groundwork had been laid. Now, all was primed for a single, orchestrated blow. What followed would not simply decide Ivanovka's fate, but echo far beyond its ruined streets, a warning and a lesson for every military power watching from afar. The attack began not with thunder, but with silence. A silence so total it became a weapon in itself. In that breathless moment before dawn, Ivanovka's defenders faced a new kind of warfare. Across command posts, radios sputtered with static as electronic countermeasures blanketed the airwaves. Officers, stripped of their ability to communicate, scrambled for runners and signal flares, as if the clock had been turned back a century. When the strike finally erupted, it was not merely a battle. It was the methodical dismantling of everything Ivanovka was meant to symbolize. In the opening moments, an intricately choreographed barrage of artillery, electronic warfare, and air sorties descended on Ukrainian command posts. Frequencies were jammed, channels severed, and a heavy radio silence settled over the defenders, leaving them blind and their commanders mute. Reports from the front lines described the chilling sensation of being cut off, unable to call for help or even confirm whether the enemy was advancing or not. It was as if the town had been enveloped in an electronic fog. Confusion took hold almost immediately. Russian assault teams surged from several vectors, exploiting weak points that had been mapped with painstaking precision. Their attacks were staggered and synchronized, overwhelming the defenders' capacity to regroup, sending tremors of panic through trenches and bunkers that had seemed invulnerable only hours before. In several sectors, Ukrainian units reported hearing the enemy's movements before they saw them, the sound of boots on rubble echoing through abandoned streets. The defenders' carefully prepared kill zones were bypassed or neutralized, and what was supposed to be a killing ground became a corridor for the advancing enemy. Within mere hours, scattered clusters of Ukrainian troops faced a grim realization. They were isolated, not just from one another, but from central command and any hope of reinforcement. Orders faded into static. With no guidance and no relief, units began to abandon fortifications en masse, leaving behind stockpiles of weapons and the physical traces of months of labor. A few squads tried to stand their ground, but most were swept away by the relentless, multifaceted assault. A sense of abandonment pervaded the defenders, reminiscent of the psychological collapse seen in the fall of Dien Bien Phu in Indochina, where isolated garrisons simply ceased to function as a coherent force. Desperate attempts to reinforce Ivanovka from neighboring sectors disintegrated almost as soon as they commenced. Convoys were ambushed on approach roads that the enemy had charted in advance. Relief columns, expecting to punch through, instead found themselves encircled and annihilated by the same precision fire that had broken Ivanovka's original defense. Each failed rescue deepened the sense of futility and despair among Ukrainian forces in the region. Commanders in rear areas faced the impossible choice: risk more lives in doomed counterattacks, or pull back and hope to establish a new line elsewhere. The urban combat that followed revealed something chilling. Russian units, once mocked for their rigidity, now moved with uncanny fluidity and discipline. They adapted in real time, leveraging intelligence to anticipate Ukrainian actions and exploiting psychological weaknesses. Every block became a trap. Resistance collapsed not just under superior firepower, but under the pressure of maneuvers so precise that defenders could not trust their own instincts. In some cases, Ukrainian troops reported being ambushed from directions they believed to be secure, a testament to the thoroughness of the enemy's preparation. By nightfall, Ivanovka, a town that had come to represent the very idea of a fortified stand, was completely under Russian control. The psychological aftershock radiated far beyond its ruined streets. Panic and disbelief swept through surrounding garrisons and command centers. For many, the fall of Ivanovka was not simply a tactical setback, it was a shattering of faith in doctrines, leadership, and the very structures meant to hold the defense together. As the hours ticked by, the sense of collapse spread. Ivanovka's loss was not a solitary disaster, but the first in a chain reaction, a crisis that would soon test the core of Ukraine's defensive strategy and force its allies to confront uncomfortable truths about modern warfare. Reports from other sectors described a sudden drop in morale, with some units abandoning positions that had not even come under attack, fearing that they too might be the next domino to fall. In the days that followed, the repercussions of Ivanovka's fall rippled outward, shaking assumptions from Kyiv to distant western capitals. New cracks would soon appear, some visible, others dangerously hidden. Analysts began to question whether other fortresses, built to the same template, might be equally vulnerable. The fall of Ivanovka became a case study overnight, dissected in war colleges and think tanks from Warsaw to Washington. What lessons can military leaders and policymakers worldwide draw from Ivanovka's collapse? Above all, Ivanovka stands as proof that layers of concrete, steel, and high-tech Western equipment are no substitute for sharp minds, adaptability, and the will to endure. For months, Ukrainian defenders executed NATO's finest playbook, raising fortifications, arming them with imported gear, and trusting in the strength of their modern lines. Yet, the moment an adversary wielded intelligence and cunning, those seemingly impenetrable defenses crumbled in a matter of days. History offers many such examples. During the Korean War, the United Nations Command built strongpoints on the assumption that firepower would compensate for mobility. The Chinese counteroffensive, however, exploited gaps in communication and coordination, bypassing and isolating these strongpoints with devastating effect. The message is blunt. Static, over-engineered strongholds, no matter their cost or pedigree, turn into liabilities when faced with creative, adaptive enemies. A fortress that is rigid and predictable ceases to be a shield. It becomes a target, inviting exploitation by those who watch, learn, and move faster than the defenders can adjust. This lesson is captured in the writings of Karl von Clausewitz and Sun Tzu, both of whom warn that the greatest danger in war is to become predictable and inflexible. This is the new reality of 21st century warfare. Intelligence, initiative, and psychological dominance now outweigh brute strength and fixed lines. Ivanovka did not fall in a single dramatic assault, but through months of quiet infiltration, relentless psychological pressure, and the slow revelation of every hidden weakness. The fortress's collapse was not a moment of lost ground, but the final act in a campaign of outthinking and outmaneuvering. Echoes of this can be seen in the fall of Mosul, where ISIS fighters, outnumbered and outgunned, used deception, infiltration, and psychological manipulation to shatter a much larger defending force. Western and Ukrainian strategists must face a hard truth. Even the most vaunted doctrines and imported technologies can unravel when challenged by a patient, agile, and deeply embedded foe. The shock from Ivanovka exposes weaknesses not just in one settlement, but across entire systems of defense, systems once believed unbreakable. This realization is not unique to Ukraine. In Afghanistan, NATO outposts fell not to massive assaults, but to carefully coordinated attacks exploiting routine and predictability. The risks of ignoring this lesson are severe. Clinging to static doctrines and pouring resources into rigid fortifications without flexible thinking or real-time intelligence invites disaster. Every new Ivanovka threatens not just wasted resources, but cascading failures, lost credibility, and systemic collapse. In the modern age, adaptation is not merely an edge, it is the price of survival. Military history is littered with the ruins of fortresses that could not adapt: Masada, Constantinople, Singapore, and now Ivanovka. So what does this mean for tomorrow's battlefields, and for the negotiations that might decide the war's outcome? Ivanovka's fall does not signal the end, but a turning point. The next moves, on the ground and at the table, will reveal who truly understands the new rules of war. For Ukraine and its allies, the challenge is to absorb the lessons of Ivanovka and change course before the pattern repeats. For their adversaries, the victory is a validation of patience, intelligence, and adaptability over brute force alone. Ivanovka's collapse redrew the map overnight, but will it also redraw the rules of war? The fall of Ivanovka was far more than a localized defeat. It ripped open the core of modern Western military doctrine, revealing how even the most fortified, NATO-blessed defenses can be outflanked by agile, intelligence-driven foes. For months, Ivanovka was the unbreakable bulwark, a city bristling with the best weapons, manned by forces trained in the latest Allied tactics. Yet it crumbled in under 2 days. That shockwave did not just jolt Ukrainian defenders, it rattled the very foundations of Western confidence. Now, a single urgent question hangs in the air. What must change to prevent the next Ivanovka? First, doctrine. For years, layered trenches, rigid strongpoints, and static lines have been the backbone of both Ukrainian and NATO thinking. Ivanovka's sudden loss exposed the flaw. Such defenses break easily, if not paired with adaptive intelligence and rapid evolution. The attackers did not simply smash through, they anticipated, outmaneuvered, and dismantled the city's routines. Modern doctrine must become more flexible, more dynamic, and more attuned to the realities of 21st century conflict. Consider the Israeli Defense Forces during the Yom Kippur War. After initial setbacks caused by overconfidence and rigid thinking, the Israelis rapidly retooled their doctrine, emphasizing mobility, deception, and rapid adaptation. Second, strategy. Reliance on visible might, thick concrete, deep minefields, endless supply convoys, bred complacency. The enemy mapped every habit, every shift change, every logistical shortcut. Their intelligence efforts burrowed deep, not just into trenches, but into the thinking of the defenders. No amount of funding or hardware can compensate for that kind of infiltration. To counter this, armies must invest in counterintelligence, operational deception, and the cultivation of unpredictability. During the Second World War, Operation Fortitude, a massive deception campaign, fooled the Germans into expecting the D-Day landings at Pas-de-Calais, not Normandy, saving countless Allied lives. Third, mindset. Perhaps the gravest lesson is that faith in manuals and procedures can become lethal. Ukrainians and their Western advisors believed that following the book would guarantee survival. But war punishes those who stop questioning and adapting. In Ivanovka, that certainty left blind spots, and the enemy exploited everyone. Modern militaries must cultivate a culture that prizes initiative, critical thinking, and the willingness to challenge assumptions. In the United States Marine Corps, for example, maneuver warfare emphasizes decentralization and initiative at every level of command, a model that has proven effective in chaotic, fluid combat environments. If nothing changes, the risk is clear. More Ivanovkas. More strongholds lost, not to brute force, but to superior preparation and unexpected tactics. Each defeat chips away at morale and erodes trust in the doctrines the West has exported. The consequences ripple outward. Allies doubt, adversaries adapt, the world recalibrates its assumptions. The collapse of French morale after the loss of Verdun, or the strategic recalibration of the Allies after the fall of Singapore, shows how quickly confidence can evaporate. So what must be done? The answer is uncomfortable, but necessary. Defense must become a moving target, constantly reassessed, always deceptive, relentlessly innovative. Intelligence must be as aggressive and creative as firepower, probing for intent and method, not just movement. Most of all, leadership must encourage doubt. Only those who question themselves can hope to stay ahead of an evolving enemy. Practical steps include regularly rotating and varying defensive routines, so no pattern becomes predictable. Investing in advanced counterintelligence and deception operations, making it difficult for adversaries to map out routines and weak points. Cultivating a culture of red teaming, where friendly forces aggressively simulate enemy tactics to find and patch vulnerabilities. Encouraging junior officers and non-commissioned officers to report flaws and suggest changes, decentralizing the process of adaptation. Leveraging artificial intelligence and machine learning to analyze patterns in both friendly and enemy behavior, identifying areas of risk before the enemy can exploit them. Ivanovka's loss is both a warning and a summons. Ignoring its lessons risks not just the defense of Ukraine, but the future of Western military credibility itself. The next Ivanovka could come sooner, and with greater consequences, than anyone dares imagine. Adapting to this new reality is not a choice. It is a matter of survival. As the dust settles, the world waits to see. Will doctrines shift, or will the lesson of Ivanovka echo, unheeded, into the next catastrophe? Only time, and the willingness of leaders to learn, will decide whether Ivanovka remains a tragic exception or the first in a long, avoidable line of defeats.